Oh, sorry. Okay. Uh, right. Okay. So, for instance, it's used for government uh, communications in India, a daily newspaper in Cairo, and the speeches in the parliament of Papua New Guinea. You may hear it when a hotel receptionist greets an Arab guest in Helsinki, when a German professor talks to a Japanese graduate student in Amsterdam, or when a Korean scientist lectures to Hungarian and Nigerian colleagues at a conference in Bangkok. Okay? English is generally acknowledged to be the world's most important language. It's perhaps worth glancing briefly at the basis for that evaluation, and this is important. There are thousands of different languages in the world, and each will seem uniquely important to those who speak it as their native language, the language they acquired at their mother's knee. So it is really a new feature in the history of language that this demand for English comes largely from the grassroots, not from the society elite, as was the case, for example, with Latin, which was forced down the throats of the previous generations of school pupils, or even as the English language itself when it was imposed in earlier times on speakers of Celtic, Bantu, or many other languages. Okay? Actually, there are estimates suggesting that about a quarter of the world's population know or think they know some English. According to Ethnologue, which is a database maintained by the Summer Institute of Linguistics in Dallas, Texas, there are about 6,800 distinct languages in the world. Yet, surprisingly enough, interestingly enough, just 5 languages out of the 6,800 languages are spoken by more than half of the world's population. And these languages are Chinese, English, Spanish, Russian, and Hindi. English cannot claim the highest number of native speakers because China has about 3 times as many. So we find that English has its special status, has its special position in its unrivaled position as a means of international communication. Most of other languages are primarily communicative channels, but within rather than across national borders. Okay? So today English is big business and the most commonly taught foreign language all over the world. All right. Now, how global is it? Already Germans talk about ein image problem. Ein is used as an indefinite article in German, and das cash flow. Das is used as an indefinite article for neutral nouns. Italians program their computers with il software. Il is Italian article. French motorists going away for weekend break pause. They use le refuel stop. Poles watch television. Spaniards have a flirt. Austrians eat Big Macs, and the Japanese go on a piconico. So as you see, all these are English-based words or are loaned words taken originally from English. This shows how global English is. For better or worse, English has become the most global of languages, the lingua franca of business, science, education, politics, and pop music. For the airlines of 157 nations out of 168 in the world, it is the agreed international language of discourse. The complexities of the English language are such that even native speakers cannot always communicate effectively, as almost every American learns on his first day in Britain. So it is important to know that we have distinct varieties of English between American and British English. Now, Robert Birchfield, the editor of Oxford English Dictionary, created a stir in linguistic circles on both sides of the Atlantic when he announced his belief that American English and English English are drifting apart so rapidly that within 200 years, the two nations won't be able to understand each other at all. Okay? So this is Robert Birchfield, and we find ourselves at a crossroads to pursue a path in the march of English. Okay? So if English is your mother tongue, you may feel a pride that your language has been so successful, but your pride might be tinged with concern when you realize that people in other countries are not using it as you are, and they are changing it to suit their needs. For example, we all know that we have some stative verbs or state verbs or non-action verbs like remember, know, understand, and we know that they are not used in progressive tense, right? But in India, for example, it's very common to hear them saying, and using English, of course, they say, I'm remembering or I'm knowing. And this is not correct in standard English. So they use it in a different way. And it's also interesting to know that everybody who has learned English now owns it or has a share in it. This makes people uncomfortable, of course, and even vaguely resentful. For example, look, it's very common to hear this sentence in England. Those who have ever been to England or those who studied in England, it's very common for them to hear such comments or remarks as saying, look what the Americans have done to English. Okay? This is found commonly in the British press. Okay? So it is very important to keep that in mind. Also, we can find out that there is a professor and American novelist who was called Charlton Laird. He said that English is the only language that had all these books of synonyms like Roger Thesaurus. So actually Roger Thesaurus is the book, or his name is Peter Mark Roger. He is a British man and he retired from work in 1840 and he kept working on Thesaurus, a book for listing synonyms of words. And actually it is his book, this book, which has perpetuated his memory until now. You know, perpetuated, خلدت ذكراه حتى الآن, has perpetuated his memory until now. And it is said that he kept working on this thesaurus since he was 8 years old, and it was as an attempt to lose himself in because he was suffering from severe bouts of depression. كان يعاني من نوبات حادة في الاكتئاب. Right. Okay. So what does it mean exactly to say English is a global language? Is it saying that everyone in the world speaks English? Certainly not. And we saw a moments ago that Chinese is spoken 3 times the English is spoken. Is it saying that every country in the world recognizes English as an official language? This is not true either. So what does it mean to say a language is a global language? Why is English the language which is usually cited in this connection? How did the situation arise and could it change? Or is it the case that once a language becomes a global language, it's there forever? Why a language becomes a global language has little, and this little here used with to give a negative meaning to the sentence in the sense that it means not. It has nothing to do with the number of people who speak it. It's much more to do with who those speakers are. Now, um, so English is full of tricky traps for the unwary foreigner. Such a language is strange to the extent that, for example, it is a polysemous language. You know what is polysemous? When one word has more than one sense, it has more than one meaning in the dictionary. And it is frightening to the extent that the word fly, for example, or all of us know fly as a harmful or annoying insect, right? But it also could mean a means of travel or transportation. It could mean a part of the gentleman's apparel. The same as with pen, for example. We know pen is the instrument with which you write, but it could mean also the profession of writing. As we say, for example, X is a master of the pen. It also can be used to mean the style of writing, to write with a witty, incisive pen, and it also could mean writer himself. For example, I will leave this novel to be completed by abler pens. Here it means writers. And also pen can be used to mean shed or the place where animals are kept, hadira. Okay? And even if you go to ornithology, which is the science of birds, it could mean pin feather or the undeveloped feather. English is so complex that you can just imagine that the person who says, I could care less, means the same as I couldn't care less. So, or even if you go to a store or to a supermarket like Tesco or Sainsbury or whatever, you can find a sign there in the store reading all items not on sale. And this, by the way, does not mean literally what it means. It doesn't mean that every item is not on sale. It means only some of the items on display are on sale. Again, responding to a person saying, how do you do with how do I do what? Okay? Though impeccable logic, that person will be taken aback. Okay? So it is interesting to again remind you that more than 400 million people in the world speak English, and the rest are trying to. So here we have some objective standards of relative importance. One criterion is the number of speakers of the language. A second is the extent to which a language is geographically dispersed, in how many continents and countries it is used. A third criterion is its functional load, how extensive is the range of purposes for which it's used. And fourth is the economic and political influence of the native speakers of the language. So if we discuss now the four criteria here to see what makes language, the English language, a predominant language, we can see, for example, number one, English ranks well below, because Chinese, as we mentioned, is spoken 3 times more than English is. The geographical dispersal of the language invites comparison with, for example, Hebrew, Latin, and Arabic as languages used in major world religions, though only Arabic has a substantial number of speakers. Now, estimates suggest that Arabic ranks 10th in the order of the languages spoken in the world. And the great literatures of the Orient spring to mind, not to mention the languages of Tolstoy, Goethe, Cervantes, Racine, etc. The fourth is the most important one because it invokes Japanese, Russian, and German, for example, as languages of powerful and productive nations, but English is the language of the United States, whose gross domestic production, it's usually abbreviated as GDP, in 1980 was more than double that of the nearest competitor, which was Japan. So if we continue here, towards the end of the 16th century, the number of mother tongue English speakers in the world is thought to have been between 5 and 7 million almost all of them living in the British Isles. Between the end of the reign of Elizabeth the First in 1603, and we know that King James came after her to ascend the throne, and the beginning of the reign of Elizabeth II in 1952, this figure increased almost 50-fold to some 250 million, the vast majority living outside the British Isles. So, as you see, of course, the British Isles is a term which is used geographically to refer to the group of islands in Western Europe, which encompasses Great Britain, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and some adjacent small other islands. Okay. Um, so English where to in the future. Now, before moving on, just let me remind you of something very important. English is a global language to the extent that more than 3,000 newspapers are published in English in India. And the 6 member nations of the European Free Trade Association conduct all their business in English, although none of them is an English-speaking country. It's actually also important to keep in mind that each nation tries to invent or to coin words to serve or to meet their needs, their practical needs in their language. For example, the Eskimos, people who are indigenous people living in Alaska or northern Canada, they have, just imagine, 50 words for types, 50, 50 words for types of snow. Okay? Interestingly enough, no word is used just for plain or for the snow that we know. They have, to them, there is a word for crunchy snow, there is another different word for soft snow, a third for fresh snow, and a fifth for old snow, etc. Italians, we all know Italians are famous and they are famed for food, especially macaroni, right? They have over 500 names for types of macaronis. Some sound distinctly unappetizing if translated literally into English. For example, strozabretti is translated as strangled priests. So, as you see, Arabic is said to have more than 600 words for camel and its equipment. So English, why is the English juggernaut unpopular? So do you think that one day English is going to be eradicated? Do you think that one day you will not be, you will not feel that it's important to learn English? English is seen as non-stoppable to some extent, and it's argued that the global popularity of English is in no immediate danger, but that it would be foolhardy, it is foolish to imagine that its preeminent position as a world language will not be challenged in some world regions and domains of use. Okay, for example, of course, it is used in the economic, demographic, and political shape of the world as it is transformed. And what would make it disappear or replace, do you think? Do you have any idea what would make English exterminated from the world? Do you have any idea? Can you think of one way? Yes? What do you think? Ah, let me try to see what if this is being. Still, you cannot try it, right? Ah, that is really that's a shame. Okay, 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 okay. Let's. Okay. Okay. So please, could you please now try to, I don't know if why this is not working. So now the chat message is working, right? But the audio is not working. I don't know why. Still not working, and this is okay. All right. Okay, let's see here. So as you see here, hmm, I'm not sure why this is not. Hmm. Okay, so um, let's see here uh, what you wrote. Okay, so at last we managed, uh, but you cannot use the sounds, and I'm not sure why this is going on. Um, okay, just a minute, please. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay. Um, so could you please try to contribute and tell me what could make English exterminate, what could wipe out English from the world? Please try to write in the chat room while I make this phone call, please. Okay. Okay, so as I can see here, I'm back again. I have found some answers here, perhaps some political reasons. Another said, one day with the power of translation, English may not be the most important language and means of communication. By the way, means with S is used as singular and plural. By stopping educating English in schools and universities, okay, then how would you be able to cope with the revolution of science? Maybe because their media, speakers of language become bilingual, maybe, okay. Maybe a less dominant language will arise in the future. That's possible. But what this language is, English language is a productive language in terms of sciences and technology, so it's impossible to get rid of English. Okay, so thank you very much for this contribution. Return to our Arabic language. Okay, this is what is going on now at the compounds of the Arabic language in Cairo, Baghdad, in Damascus, مجامع اللغة العربية في دمشق وقاهرة وبغداد. But unfortunately, they found that many words are, if they are translated, they are not in common use. For example, take just the translation of sandwich, شاطر ومشطور وبينهما كامخ, أو تلفاز, they translated as الرائي, etc. So um, in especially in the scientific field, like for example mitochondria, they translate as al-mutaqaddirat. But what would that suggest in Arabic when you come across mutaqaddirat? So we have put more their words into their English speech. So people start learning Chinese, and this may affect English. Okay, so actually regarding Ala's contribution, she said when more words are introduced, let's, for example, let me tell you just a quick fact. For example, the Webster's Third New International Dictionary lists 4,500 words, and the Revised Oxford English Dictionary listed 615,000 words, although about 200 only English words are in common use. For example, also in German, only 184,000 words are used in German. Okay, so the number of words wouldn't affect the disappearance of language. Okay, so I would say if we go back to our presentation here, okay, so on the global status of English, actually we have a video here, but I don't want to waste time. You can watch it later. Would you like to watch a part of it? Are you interested to watch part of it? Right. Okay. We'll see 5 minutes of it because it's about 10 minutes. Really? Okay, so let's stop and don't waste time on it. Okay, but my voice was clear. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. I got a phone call saying that the voice was not audible. Okay, so the future of English is beyond all social control, and attitudes will account for little. It seems that many non-native speakers around the world have a love-hate relation towards English. What we can foresee at the moment is limited. We have a small window on a fast changing world. It's said that the 20th century was the century of American power and influence, culminating in the present situation where the United States is the world's only remaining superpower. If we project present trends into the future, the West's economic power seems set to decline, and the 21st century is shaping up to be China's century. English in the future. One intriguing possibility, perhaps 100 years hence, is the technology in the form of machine translation will allow people around the world to communicate in real time in their own languages. For example, a Japanese speaker in Tokyo phoning up a German speaker in Berlin would speak a message in Japanese, which the German speaker would hear in German. It sounds a futuristic fantasy, but much research in Japan has already been conducted with such an ambitious goal in mind. So one of the attendees said that translation and machine translation could lessen the extent of the spread of English. If automatic interpreting and translation became successful and generally available, the need for English or any other language as a world lingua franca would decline, but hardly disappear. So here then, for example, let me tell you, for example, that ethical concerns could turn the world against, or could turn the table against English as a predominant language. For example, many people started to see English as language of colonizers. And there is a great Kenyan novelist whose name is Ngugi, Ngugiwa. He gave up writing in English, and he said that he saw English as a contaminated language for being the language of colonial oppression. In Singapore, on the other hand, for example, the stance is clearly stated and different. They said yes to English, but no to Western cultural values and traditions. Okay? So now, if we move to school models of English, where English is a foreign language, we may expect the American and the British standard varieties to continue to be the major models, competing increasingly with the standard varieties of other countries such as Australia in regions that are within the sphere of influence of those countries. So we can see that there is a battle with using American English or British English, and which one is better and which one should be followed and used or taught at our schools to our children. What form of language is appropriate for given situations is essential. It is why you find in good dictionaries such variety labels as spoken, written, American English, British English, formal, informal, polite, taboo, idiom, etc. So this is an example showing you some of the variety labels. You see? Example, etymology, pronunciation, syllabication, synonyms, spelling, parts of speech, etc. Spread of English in the world. This is a map showing the spread of English, and we have, as you see, English is categorized into American and British, and these countries, as you see, followed British English, while American English is followed in other countries, and it all depends on mainly on the British Empire in the past. All countries which were under the British Empire rule seem to still be using British English. Okay? Again, some usage labels which you can find: American, Australian, mainly British, mainly American, and we have formal, informal, and my students, my current and my former students, know that whenever I introduce a new term or word to them, I tell them that this is used in British English, this is used in American English, and this is formal, informal, used in the passive, in progressive tenses, in newspapers, in reports, in news reports, in literature, etc. We have another video, but I'm not sure if you can see it or if you can listen to it or not, because you said that the voice is inaudible. So I'm not sure if you can see it or not. Anyway, let me say something. For example, in countries where English is predominantly the native language, the form of written English taught in school is normally the standard variety. So we all the time believe, and I think this is the correct thing, is that the written or the writing medium or the written medium of English is the standard one, and the other one is, which is speech, is not the standard variety, right? And to the extent that standard written or written language is associated with educated users of language, right? Um, so, as we mentioned, the choice between using English, British English or American English depends to a large extent on various factors, like, for example, whether the country was formerly a British or American colony. It also depends on another factor, which is the proximity to Britain or America, and which one of the two countries, I mean Britain or America, had most influenced the countries in question, economic, culture, or scientific development. Okay? Um, so many of the features of English are found in all or at least nearly all varieties. So we know that we have already different varieties, but there are some common features among all these varieties. The general features of this kind belong to what is known as common core of the language. Okay, so what is, like, let me give you a simple example. The common core between all varieties of English is that we say he is, we don't say he are. This is common core. And this applies to all levels of language, like, for example, the lexical items, the vocabulary, the structure, etc. And I will show you some examples. One clear example at the lexical level, for example, children, offspring, and kids. So if you use children, it is the common core term. It is a neutral term. But if you use offspring, then it occurs first in a rather formal situation, as is used of animals and about humans. And for kids, for example, it occurs in informal or familiar situation. So as you see, we have different levels. If we go to the structural level, feeling tired, she went to bed early. So as you see, feeling tired, or as she felt tired, these are tenseless, tenseless subordinated clauses. Okay, the common core is the second one. As she felt tired, she went to bed. The first one is rather formal, and the last one is informal and is used more in conversations or between among family members or friends. We recognize a gradient in attitude between formal, relatively stiff, cold, polite, impersonal on the one hand, and informal, relatively relaxed, warm, rude, friendly on the other. And if you still remember, I mean, I'm talking to my students, I gave you once, if you still remember, ways to disagree with someone. And when I gave you the answer key, if you still remember as well, it showed you some gradient showing you formal, informal, and which is rude, and which is less formal, etc. You still remember that, right? The corresponding linguistic contrasts involve both grammar and vocabulary. Young native speakers at the age of 5 or 6 have, broadly speaking, one form of English that is made to serve all purposes, whether they are talking to their mother, their pets, their friends, or an aged neighbor. So a 6-year-old boy is not able to use different language which suits age, right? They use the same language with the elderly and with their friends, or even teacher, grandfather, etc. They are not able to distinguish between what they should use. Okay. Right. طيب. Um, so although this invariant language can cause parents twinges of embarrassment, it is generally recognized that it is a limitation that the child will grow out of. That's why some of my students get furious at me with me when I ask them to use proper language with their instructors. Okay, so we have variation, or we have social variation in language. Okay, we have what we call social variation. It depends on the gender of the addressees and on the sex of the addressees, and even depends on the education or the education background of the speaker. So a person or an illiterate person speaks differently from a professor at the university, right? So all these factors must be taken into account, right? Okay. Any question? If you have any question, please write it in the chat room. At least I can read what you write when I want. Okay, so we are one step towards finding a solution to use your mics. And I just remembered now that a language does not become a global, for example, because of its intrinsic structural properties. خصائص اللغوية linguistic features have nothing to do with making a language global or not, or because of, or due to the size of vocabulary or the stock of vocabulary of a certain language. Okay, or because, for example, the vehicle of great literatures in the past. It is, again, it lies or it lurks in the power of its speakers. Okay, clear? Right. It is said that when Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, and he arrived in what was called then the New World, there were an estimated 1,000 languages, out of which only 600 remain today. And almost all languages are subject to changes. All languages change with the passage of time. And one rare exception is written Icelandic, اللغة الأيسلندية, okay? To the extent that a modern Icelander can read sagas written 1,000 years ago, okay? And saga, S-A-G-A, is a term which refers to medieval prose narrative. And in Arabic even, we can, although we cannot understand fully, for example, the language or the classical language of al-mu'allaqat or whatever, but we can get the gist at least, right? So language of the spent odes, which was written 1,500 years ago, okay, and where poets used to go to Okaz fair to show off what they have written, and they used to brag about their versifications. You can until now read some or a lot of lines of verse written at that time, and you can understand them very well, and you can even feel the beauty of poetry at that time. And I just can remember now when Antara says فوددت تقبيل السيوف لأنها لمعت كبارق ثغرك المتبسم. Until now you can feel the beauty of a line of verse which was written 1,500 years ago. Right? Right. So foreign learners are in somewhat similar position until their skill in the language is really very advanced. It's attitudinally invariant, though the particular variety is much less predictable than that of the native child. The three-way class of formal, neutral, informal is not, of course, adequate to describe the full range of linguistic varieties that are evoked by differences of attitude. We should add at least one category at each end of the scale. So we have very formal, formal, neutral, informal, and very informal. Now we come to writing versus speech. Now, we all know that speech is the primary source of language, and it was It existed long before writing system was invented, and writing system was just invented to record speech. So speech is the origin of language, not writing. Language users' activity take the form of either. So we have here English makes use of two channels, speech and writing, and they have different transmission systems. So the language used, it could take either the form of vocal movements, generating sound waves, and this is a manifestation of speech, or hand movement, leaving visible traces, and this is a manifestation of writing. In speech, the language user is a listener or a speaker, and here the ear is addressed. In writing, the language user is a writer or reader, and the eye is addressed. So we have also one more thing here to talk about. It is situation-based comparison. And by situation-based, we mean in writing, both the receiver of the text and the producer of the text are not necessarily required to be present at the same time. That's the reason why we can, for example, read prophetic traditions, hadith sharifa, stated by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is due to the writing medium of expression. But in speech, the situation or the context of situation in speech necessitates that both the speaker and the listener be present. Here is a very quick is a sketch of comparison between writing and speech. In writing, it takes longer to produce, and it leaves a permanent record, so you can reread the message again and again, and you have time to revise it, write, check, rewrite piece of writing, and you plan what you want to write beforehand. On the other hand, in speech, it is processed in real time. You don't have time, and it is transitory because it leaves as sound waves, it leaves the mouth of the speaker, and it goes to the auricle or to the ear of the listener, and it leaves no trace, of course, other than what we may remember. It requires fast, instantaneous production and understanding, no time to prepare what to say in advance, okay? And if we have a look, or if you just try to reflect on that, on any speech, you'll find that it is full of silent pauses, voice-filled pauses indicated by when we write, when we have a script of speech, repetitions, I, or he, or whatever, I was. False start is the failure to complete the sentence or loss of track of the sentence. Fillers, well, you know, you see. Short forms or contractions, his. That's why I keep reiterating a very important advice to my students, not to write contractions or short forms in academic writings or when they try to translate, because this is a characteristic of speech. Okay? Clear? Right. Overview of grammar, semantics, and pragmatics. The study of words is the business of lexicology, and it is also the business of compiling words and listing them in dictionary. Words must be combined into larger units, and grammar encompasses the complex set of rules specifying such combination. Meaning relations, or sometimes we call it sense relations, okay, if you go back to John Lyon's books, in the language system are the business of semantics. It's the study of meaning, and semantics therefore has relevance equally with lexicology and within grammar. The meaning of linguistic expressions when uttered within particular types of situation is dealt with in pragmatics, which is concerned with the communicative force of linguistic utterances. So I myself say that semantics is to mean what you say. This is my own definition of semantics. It is to mean what you say. But pragmatics is to mean what you don't say. this looks as paradox and hard to difficult or hard to understand or to work out. Again, for example, if we are sitting in a room and I said, well, it's hot in here, what is supposed to be said in this context of situation? Or why am I conveying this message? It is hot in here. It is simply it is a hint that you need to turn on the air conditioner or to open a window, okay, or to move to and sit in the open air. Although I never requested that we go out, okay. Again, if we the same sentence, for example, look, the police coming, the police coming. If this sentence is said by all of us, let's say we are on a journey to the sea and we are on the same bus and suddenly the bus broke down and we stopped. Now, if we see a police patrol coming and we said the police are coming, then this means this is a happy, this reflects the happiness of participants of the situation, because we believe that the police are going to help us fix up our bus to continue our journey. But the same sentence, the police are coming, if this sentence is said by some robbers who are going to rob a bank in the dead of night, if it is said, it means that they have to be cautious, or they have to break a run, or they have to escape or run away. So you see how pragmatics plays central role in context of situation. All types of organization, but notably lexicology and grammar, enter into the structure of texts, which constitute spoken and written discourse. If you have a look here, for example, pragmatics, tell the men to move out. Why, sir? Look at this stupid person who says the rent's too high. Can you see the meaning, or why it is it acts as a joke? Because the third person, who is on the right, understands the word move out as to move out of their houses. ينتقلوا إلى مسكن آخر, while they are in the battlefield, and he asks them to change their position they have taken up. So you see the difference? So pragmatics plays very important here, a very important thing to be taken into account. Actually, yesterday I got a message. Let me find it, and I think it is appropriate for the context today. So look here, for example, I will read it for you. Yes, it is on WhatsApp. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله، أحباب الرسول، معكم فلان، أخصائي بعلاج جميع الأمراض بالقرآن، وعالم في استخراج الكنوز المدفونة بواسطة الأرواح وحل المشاكل وفك السحر وما بعرف إيش. المهم the one rejoinder، أحد الردود عليه قال له بتقدر تفك الحظر. So this could be taken as a pragmatics based response, because which حظر is meant here? Is it when I block person on the WhatsApp, or does it mean to ease and to relax the lockdown caused by coronavirus? So this is also another example of showing what pragmatics is. Can you work out the intended meaning here? Have a look here, please. Speaker A, I have a 12-year-old daughter. That's right. I also have a dog. Oh, I'm sorry. Now, it is a shock actually to read speaker B's response. What's the relation between I have a dog and I'm sorry? Right? It is a bit perplexing, or it is a bit confusing. However, you will be able to understand this, and you'll see that this is logical answer when you know the background to this. Okay, the meaning of this exchange is hard to pin down unless you have the background that speaker A is trying to rent a flat from speaker B, who doesn't accept pets. So he declined to give him the flat or the house for rent. You see? What about this? Have you seen Umar today? The black car is over there. So what is the relation between the existence or the presence of Umar and the black car? Also, again, any justification for the answer in response to the question? Again, this looks incoherent unless you know that Umar has a black car, and seeing his car parked indicates that he is there. He hasn't left. You see? Clear? Right. Okay. Now we come to a very problematic issue. I will open the chat room to see if you have any questions to ask, and then we'll continue. Yes. Okay. Okay. As some interesting transition. Okay. Here there is a question about formal and informal use of words. All that can be found in good dictionaries, Ms. Ala. All that can be found in good dictionaries. And I always advise my students to keep or to possess one of 3 or 4 different dictionaries, either Cambridge, or Longman, or Oxford, or Collins Cobalt, or even Macmillan. These are the best dictionaries for advanced learners in which you can find detailed description of words and labels. Okay, all right. That says, again, I always face this problem not knowing the proper word to use in sentence misreading the dictionary. That's right. I always tell my students, I'm going to convey the next answer provided here. Extensive reading and doing considerable amount of reading is the key to your problem. You have to read a lot so that you can then be able to distinguish and to make distinction and make firm lines between seemingly similar words. Okay, for example, last week I was talking with my students about the difference between occur and take place, and we said that occur is usually used in formal contexts and it's used for unpleasant situations, like for example earthquakes occur in this region 100 years ago, while take place as a verb is used for pre-arranged events. So these events must be pre-arranged, like for example a funeral, like wedding, like graduation ceremony. We say take place. The funeral will take place at 6 o'clock, for example. Again, we were talking about the difference between to meet and to encounter, and when we were translating Grenada poem قصيدة غرناطة, and we said في مدخل الحمراء كان لقانا ما أطيب اللقيا بلا ميعاد. So we were discussing the best words to translate بلا ميعاد, and many of my students translated as to meet, and we said meet means you meet a person in 2 different situations. Either you know that person and there is an arrangement, a pre-arrangement for that meeting, or when there is when you meet somebody by chance, okay, but you know that person. But when you meet someone whom you don't know before, it is better to use the verb to encounter. We also have other verbs like to bump into or to run into. These 2 ones are used for people whom you know and you met by chance. So if I said, last week I bumped into an old college friend, it means that I know that person before. But if I said I encountered, that's why, for example, we keep using encounter with the translators. We said that translators are most likely to encounter problems at the lexical level. Here, encounter means that they come across these problems without arrangement. Okay? Again, all right. Thanks, Nihad. Byron, you can develop an ear for what is right and what is wrong. Okay, 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 you can develop an ear which wouldn't jar for what you hear, okay, but we are not singing here. Okay, okay, well, we keep saying that knowledge starts from cradle and never ends, even with going to grave. So knowledge knows no limits. Okay, so let's continue. Any other questions? Do you have any other questions? Yes? No questions. Okay, so let's continue. And I'm sorry if I have driven you bored into this session, and I know I have been harping on. Okay, right. So let's continue. So prescriptive and descriptive grammar is a very thorny problem. And actually, it is a problem that has been long-standing, and it is a knotty problem actually, because we have a lot of things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about prescriptive and descriptive grammar. My students in level 1 always remember that I gave them grammar tests, and most of them failed doing them all correct. And I provided them also with some justifications at the end, and we discussed some of these answers. And I'm thinking of giving you this grammar test at the end of this session, just to test your grammar and see prescriptive and descriptive grammar, how they go. Now, a perennial argument with dictionary makers is whether they should be prescriptive, and prescriptive means whether they should just prescribe how language should be used. They have to command, they have to order, they have to say what and how they should use language, or descriptive, which merely means to describe how language is used by its own native speakers. Prescriptive grammars, it means grammars which put forward recommendations on language usage. Some instances include subject pronouns follow verbs to be. For example, do we say it is I or it is me? This is one problem of prescriptive grammar. In the prescriptive grammar, they reject using it is me, because they say that after verbs to be, a pronoun in the nominative case must be used. So we should say it is I. This is the formal way of using English. Whom should be used as the relative pronoun instead of who in object function. So this is the person whom I met yesterday. Okay? But in descriptive grammar, they say it's okay to use who. So this is a person who I met yesterday. We have also proscriptive grammar, not prescriptive. So we have here O instead of E. And it is grammars which forbid certain usages rather than commanding them. So here we can come across, for example, never end a sentence with a preposition. And we call this phenomenon in linguistics as preposition stranding. For example, don't say, this is the person I'm fond of talking to. You have to say, according to prescriptive grammar, this is the person to whom I'm fond of talking. So don't end a sentence with a preposition. Also, they have a problem with, for example, let's say, split infinitives. When we try to insert an adverb between to infinitive and its verb. So don't say to meticulously examine the evidence. You have to say to examine the evidence meticulously. So don't use the adverb in between to and the verb. Okay? So descriptive grammar is the way grammarians describe how native speakers use their language. Okay? And I can remember something here important. For example, all all prescriptive grammar actually all prescriptive grammars are based actually on making English grammar conform to Latin. So they try to compare it to Latin because they think that Latin is the prestigious language against which its grammar should be likened to. Okay, and some people humorously enough say uh, comparing English grammar and to fit it into pro-Christian bed is just like asking people to play volleyball using the rules of football. If we go back also, if we can remember that there is a book which is called The English Language, okay, which is by also the same person, one editor of Oxford Dictionary, Robert Birchfield. Um, um, he has an important book which was published in 1991. It's called The English Language, in which he said that F. Visser, this is a person, if you are curious about names, I can write them for you so that you can proceed with these names for further readings. Are you interested to provide you with names as their spelling or not? Yes? I cannot. Let's see. Some no, some yes. Okay, okay. We'll go by the vast majority. Okay, right. So we have the first person is F. Visser. Okay, he said that it is necessary to vote 200 pages just to discuss one aspect of the present participle. So this is one grammar. Hello? I think it is working. Voice is working now. Yes? Okay. Okay, so the problem with prescriptive grammar is that early authoritatives, especially of grammarians, they not only used Latin grammar as their model, but they went to farcical length of writing English grammar in Latin, as for example, Sir Thomas Smith. He has an important book which was written in 1568. Okay. Also, we have another person, Alexander Gill. He has also an important book which was written in 1619, just 1 year before the third expedition from England reached the New World, America. Okay, it was well, a flood of ideas coming to my mind, but in 1620, the third expedition coming from England to the New World, to America at that time, with black slaves on it, okay, reached England at that time, and 3 expeditions were sponsored by a person called Raleigh, William or Robert Raleigh, and he was an advisor to Queen Elizabeth the First, of course. Okay, and we can remember that in the midst of the American Revolution in 1780, we have a person who was called John Adams, who was the second president of the States after George Washington. He wrote to the President of Congress appealing him to set up an academy for the purpose of refining, improving English. And in 1806, the American Congress considered a bill to institute a national academy, which saw light and was founded finally in 1820. So my legal translation students understand very well what is meant by bill when we say that this is a bill. Okay, it is a law before being approved and before getting the final approval of the members. We call it bill. After it is approved, we call it act or law. But again, with no perpetual benefits of language. So the academy in America was founded in 1820, but it wasn't of benefit. Okay, and not long ago, in December 1988, over 90% of French school teachers voted in favor of a proposal to introduce the sort of spelling reforms the academy itself had introduced 200 years ago. Do you know what happened then? The 40 venerable members of the academy, the French academy, they were up in apoplectic arms. كتبت بهذه الحرفية. These are the exact words mentioned in the London Sunday Times. They said that the French language is sacred and it accepts no change whatsoever. And one of the changes they asked for is to, for example, get rid of this X as plural mark, okay, and to replace it with S as the English has. But that was, of course, rejected. So again, it is important here also to keep in mind that the prescriptive grammar stemmed out of the need to refine language and to make language correct and free of any mistakes and errors. Okay? So if we continue here, consider the parts of speech. In Latin, the verb has 120 inflections, and this is very important. So in Latin, the verb has inflections that you could count up to 120 inflections to any verb, while in English we don't have more than 5, right? So it is very difficult to try to fit the Latin grammar and to impose it into English. In English, it never has more than 5. See, sees, saw, seeing, and seen. And often it gets by with just 3 in some verbs or irregular verbs like hit, hits, hitting. Seldom do we stop to think about it because we take it for granted, but some of the most basic concepts in English are naggingly difficult to define. What, for instance, is a sentence? Some people would say, and dictionaries would define it broadly as a group of words constituting a full thought and containing at a minimum subject, which is realized as a noun, and a predicate, which is realized as a verb or verb phrase. However, if I inform you that I have just crashed your car and you reply what or where or how, you have clearly expressed a complete thought and you uttered a sentence, but this doesn't satisfy or this doesn't meet the definition given in dictionaries. But where are the subject and predicate? Where are the noun and verb? Not to mention the prepositions, conjunctions, articles, and other components that we normally expect to find in a sentence. They say, traditional grammarians say that such questions or these question words are used elliptically because some words are elided and some words are omitted from these sentences. They should be interrogative sentences. For example, what did you say, or what did you do, or how did you collide with my car, etc. So they consider these as elliptical sentences. Okay? Any question? Should we go back to the chat room for any questions to answer before we move on? Yes? Yes. Okay. So again, with an official academy to guide English, okay, the English-speaking world has long relied on self-appointed authorities. So we had some people who try to write books about what should be said and how language should be used. Okay. For example, we have F.G. Fowler, okay, and Sir Ernest Gowers in Britain. So that if you want to go back to that one time, if you have time, you can go and see that. Okay, we have and F.G. Fowler. Okay, these are brothers, by the way. These are brothers. Okay, and Sir Ernest Gowers. These two people are both are in Britain. Okay, while we have in America we have William Sapphire. This person is in the US. Okay, so these people try to write something about how and what to use. For example, let me give you an interesting example. In the late 1970s, the American President Jimmy Carter said, so that you can find it. The government of Iran must realize that it cannot flaunt with impunity. Impunity هي الحصانة الدبلوماسية. Okay. طبعا النص طويل. Okay, but I just want to show you this. Now, Jimmy Carter used flaunt, and the flaunt actually means to show off. Okay, so he wanted to use flouted, but he used flaunt. So this is the correct usage he should have used instead. So this is also another reason why prescriptive grammars were a must and were needed badly to correct people as they speak. And actually, there are no officially appointed guardians for the English language who sits down all those rules. For example, as we mentioned about preposition stranding, and also, by the way, each other and one another. They say that each other is used between two only. But if we have more than two, we say one another. More than two people. Okay? So we talk to each other if I'm talking to Adil only. But we said we talked to one another if we are three or more people sitting in the same room. Okay? Clear? Now, again, some people keep saying that, okay, why should we give up Latin to be used as model for English grammar while we still, until now, use morphemes in English which are not of English origin? Like, for example, if we have the word trusteeship. Trust alone as a stem, okay, is taken from, it is a Nordic stem. Nordic stem means it has entered language after the Norman conquest, الفتح النورمندي 1066. Okay, and this E is taken from French. Okay, this is out of French. It is an affix French. We know that affix could be prefix or suffix, and ship is taken from Old English. Old English. So as you see, English words are conglomeration or amalgam of different words and morphemes taken from different languages. Again, for example, according to prescriptivism, we should say different from, not different than or different to. And they consider different than as a regrettable Americanism, and thus it is ungrammatical. Okay? If you wish, we can conduct one session about Americanisms and British usage at all levels. We can discuss that later. Okay? So although حكينا على we were speaking about different than, right? And they consider it today to be as Americanism, right? And they call it regrettable Americanism. يعني شيء يعني يتحسر عليه، شيء يدمي القلب، خطأ ما بيصير يستخدموها. This is the way they talk about descriptive grammar. Although different than has been in common use in English and was used by exalted writers like Daniel Defoe or even Charles Dickens or Samuel Coleridge. Okay? Again, if we go back, for example, to the New York Times manual, في كتاب حلو, the New York Times manual of style and usage. هذا كتاب مشهور مهم. Okay? In this book, it is mentioned that hopefully should not be used. Hopefully, كنا بنستخدم hopefully أملا فيه أو على أمل أنه كذا, right? Hopefully it will stop raining and we can go out on our picnic, for example. They said hopefully should not be used and it should be replaced with another passive voice form. It is hoped that. This is the way they find or they state that it should be used. Okay? And by the way, I'm going to give you some interesting information. Until the 18th century, it was correct, and underline the word correct, to say was, even if you were referring to one person. Okay? So we didn't use to say you were. Okay? Clear? So people expected that dictionaries would take up the banner of defenders of the language, but in recent years, they have increasingly shied away from the role. Okay? They couldn't continue to defend language in the correct way. And now some people would say, why should we all bother to know all this? For example, Max Muller, who is a leading German philosopher or philologist, at the turn of the 20th century, he said that the average number of words used by a farm laborer, okay, is not more than 300 words of everyday usage. يعني باليوم, every day, a farm laborer cannot use more than 300 words. Clear? So why should we be bothering knowing all these things while they are not important and we don't need much words to be used in our life? So again, if we go back to Edmund Spenser, Edmund Spenser is known to be an important English poet during the Renaissance age. Okay, he died in 1599. And he is best known for his poem The Fairy Queen. في ذلك الوقت كانت تكتب هذا الشكل. كلمة fairy queen كانت تكتب بهذا الشكل. This is the modern English spelling, but in the past it used to be written fairy queen. Okay, he said, they have made our tongue a gallimaufry. He said, they have made our tongue. Of course, tongue here means a gallimaufry and hodgepodge or hodgepodge. هذا كلام منقول حرفي عن Edmund Spencer, because he saw that there was a lot of confusion in the language. So he was asking for important grammars to set right the grammar which was being used at that time. Clear? Any question? Yes. Let me see if you have any questions. Yes, no questions? No questions. Good. Okay, so if we continue, so in English, in short, we possess a language in which the parts of speech are almost entirely notional. A noun is a noun and a verb is a verb, largely because the grammarians say they are. In the sentence, I'm suffering terribly. Suffering is a verb, but my suffering is terrible, it is a noun. Yet both sentences use precisely the same word to express precisely the same idea. So it is important to keep in mind that the same word in English can be used as a different part of speech in a different sentence. Right? Quickly and sleepily are adverbs, but sickly and deadly and probably friendly with them are adjectives. So breaking is a present tense participle, but as often as not it is used in the past tense sense. He was breaking the window when I saw him. So as you see, it is here used in the past, but break as a form is the same as present simple in he is breaking the window, for example, right? So it is only the finite verb that decides what tense you have. You have to go back to the finite verb to know what tense is being used. Broken, on the other hand, is a past tense participle, but as often as not, it is employed in the present tense sense. I think I've just broken my toe, or even future tense sense. If he wins the next race, he will have broken the school record. By the way, right. Okay. So to deal with all the anomalies, the parts of speech must be so broadly defined as to be almost meaningless. English grammar is so complex and confusing for the one very simple reason that its rules and terminology are based on Latin. In Latin, to take one example, it is not possible to split an infinitive. So that's why, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that they don't allow to insert an adverb between to and the verb. So in English, the early authorities decided it shouldn't be possible to split an infinitive either. For a very long time, it was taken entirely for granted that the classical languages must serve as models. Dryden spoke for an age when he boasted that he often translated his sentence into Latin to help him decide how best to express them in English. So also my students know when we talked about John Dryden and about his tri-nomenclature of categorization of types of translation, paraphrase, metaphrase, and mutation. So he used, just imagine how he used to translate sentences into Latin to help him decide what sentence should, or how sentences should be constructed in English. In 1660, Dryden believed there should be an academy to regulate English usage, and for the next 2 centuries, many others would echo his view. So in 1664, the Royal Society for Advancement of Experimental Philosophy formed a committee to improve the English tongue, though nothing lasting seems to have come of it. 33 years later, in his essay upon projects, Daniel Defoe was calling for an academy to oversee the language. So this is a true photo of this academy, the Royal Society for Advancement of Experimental Philosophy. And the model for all these was the French Academy, founded by Cardinal Richelieu in 1635. So they all tried to imitate the French model. In its youth, the Academy was an ambitious motivator of change. And in 1762, after many years of work, it published a dictionary that regularized the spellings of some 500 words, almost a quarter of the words then in common use. So as you see, at that time, words that were very few compared to today's stock of vocabulary, right? Consider the persistent notion that sentences should not end with a preposition. The source of this stricture and several other equally dubious ones was Robert Loth, who is an 18th century clergyman and amateur grammarian, whose A Short Introduction to English Grammar, published in 1762, enjoyed a long and distressingly influential life both in his native England and abroad. So it was important to keep that in mind, that it was Robert Loth was the first who wrote some important book which lasted for a long time. Even until now, they take it as reference book for prescriptive grammar. It is to Loth we can trace many a pedant's most treasured notions. The belief that you must say different from rather than different to or different than. The idea that two negatives make a positive. For example, we shouldn't say in today's English, I didn't say nothing, because they consider that two negatives make a positive. While if we go back to Shakespeare's time, we find that he himself mentioned in his plays, he wrote 37 plays and 157 poems, he used 4 negatives in the same sentence, and it was okay. So this is the first page of Loth's book. Okay. So so after working on grammar, people were very interested to know the correct usage. We should turn to the last words of the venerable French grammarian Dominique Bonneau, who proved on his deathbed that a grammarian's work is never done when he turned to those gathered loyally around him and whispered, "I'm about to die," or "I'm going to die." Either expression is used. So just imagine that somebody is on his deathbed and the last words said before he died was, should I use "I am about to" or "I am going to die"? And then he gave approval to himself that either is acceptable. In letter number 8 of his Grammar of the English Language, in a series of letters published 1829, William Cobbett advises his son James, aged 14, on the problems of irregular verbs. So you can just try to imagine how people were very strict in that. I myself, while I was on a visit to the Hyde Park in London, I heard a person who stopped the conversation with his 6 or 7-year-old son, and he dictated him to say, "My sister ate, not eated." He wouldn't allow him to continue saying the sentence despite interruption for 6 or 7 times. You had to say my sister ate, not eated. So this is the first, this is the front page of the book, and this is William Cobbett, and this is our dear late grammarian, French grammarian, around with people around him. So it was very important to keep that in mind and to understand what is going on about grammar and spelling. And if you let me tell you that in 1604 and in 1755, it was Samuel Johnson's date when he completed the dictionary of the English language, okay, in which he revised the lexicon. Lexicon means the stock of vocabulary as its first authoritative treatment. And it took him 7 years to provide definitions to 40,000 words. Okay? So again, if we those in England can visit the place where in which Samuel Johnson wrote his dictionary, and his house was rescued from demolition in 1911 and was refurbished and was renovated during the 1980s, and now it is known as Johnson Museum. Okay, it is in Gough Square in London. Again, if we go back to the spelling and punctuation in Middle English and in even modern English, early modern English, if you take a novel by Jane Austen, for example, you can read on for pages before a point of linguistic difference would stop you. It is very similar to the day or to the grammar or to the grammar we know today. You wouldn't be stumbling while you read it in her own writing. Okay. However, the difference between words at that time and today's is regarding some difference of sentence patterns. The place of stress in certain words differed from the past. Okay, and people were very concerned with prescriptive grammar and to make sure that they were writing correct grammar. Jane Austen herself, who studied at Abbey School, which I visited when I was in London, her concern was concerned with correcting grammar of her later editions. She kept correcting the grammar of her previous editions. Okay? So it is very important that it was important that 18th century grammarians held the view that English had to be systematized. There had to be some rules to govern the usage of grammar, to simply to stamp out any errors. Okay? Clear? Now, if we move to Pidgin and Creole, this is the penultimate point to be discussed today. English language, or the English language, okay, the English language has undergone some strange changes, okay, metamorphoses through its encounters with other languages throughout the world, and none stranger than in the creation of composite languages known as Pidgins and Creoles. Of course, these two terms are used extensively in sociolinguistics. So a pidgin is a reduced and simplified makeshift language used for contacts, especially trading contacts between people who do not share a common language. So it is a language with reduced grammatical structure, okay, and lexicon and stylish range. Clear? And whenever we have a structure which is affected by this new language, we said that this structure is pigeonized. Okay, and this language is usually formed by when we have two speech communities which don't share a language, and for the purpose of communicating, they try to invent a language which is taken from both languages. This is called pidgin. Okay, and it develops um, the need for motivation um, and for that's why, for example, wherever you find pigeons, then there are some economic development because it develops and it stems out of contact or a trade contact between people. Okay, and with the passage of time, when this pigeon is used as a mother tongue to people who came later, like for example, children who were born to learn the pidgin as their mother tongue, then it stops to be called pidgin. It is called a Creole. Okay? So if a pidgin language is transmitted from parents to children, it may become the mother tongue of a community and so turn into a Creole. A pidgin has no native speakers, while a Creole has become native to some of its speakers. Creole languages in the world today consist to a large extent of words derived from other languages and are usually classified as Spanish-based, English-based, Dutch-based, and so on. There are some 30 English-based Creoles in the world, most of them spoken in the Caribbean, West Africa, and the West Pacific. English-based Creoles found in the Caribbean developed during the slave trade and draw on various African languages. So we can any questions sent here? No questions. Okay. So it is important, for example, here linguists try to draw some distinctions between varieties that run from acrolect. I don't know if you can find this word in dictionary. Okay, acrolect, and we have mesolect, okay, and we have basilect. These are used especially when we talk about pigeons. Acrolect is the closest to the standard language. Is the closest to standard language. So we said that it goes through transformation from standard English to pidgin. So we have 3 stages. Acrolect is the closest to the standard English. For example, in the Caribbean, they say me sick. It means I am sick. So this is the closest to the standard English or to the original variety. And basilect is when it is the furthest or when it is closest to Creole or to pidgin. For example, they say me knew. It means I know. So you see how far it is different from the standard of the original English. And mesolect is intermediate. It is the transitory stage between the two, the acrolect and the basilect. Okay? Actually, there is a story that started this pidgin. During the early years of the American settlement, a distinctive form of English was emerging on the islands of the West Indies, spoken by the incoming black population. They were brought from Africa as black slaves. And as a consequence of the importation of African slaves who work on the sugar plantations, practices started by the Spanish in 1517. Okay, when ships for Europe traveled to the West African coast to exchange cheap goods for black slaves. These black slaves used to be shipped to the Caribbean islands and the American coast. Now the ships returned to England, okay, to complete what they used to call the Atlantic Triangle of Journey. Okay, now the first 20 African slaves arrived in Virginia on a Dutch ship in 1619. Now notice with me that even the word Virginia, the name of the state, which is known today, Virginia, is named after one of the expeditions which were sent by Sir Raleigh during the Queen Elizabeth I. And because she was called Virgin Queen or Childless Queen, that state was called Virginia after Virgin Queen. And it is still until today. Now the policy of the slaves, of the slave traders, was to bring people of difficult or of different language backgrounds together in the same ship to make it difficult for them to plot rebellion. So they deliberately used to bring different people of different languages on the same ship so that they do not stage a rebellion against them. The result was the growth of several pidgin forms for communication between slaves and sailors. Okay, so this is the first instance how pigeons started to stem and to grow. Okay, clear? So if we continue, so the jury's out. Okay, the jury's out. It means this is a idiomatic expression, which means something hasn't been decided. It is still being argued on whether these so-called contact languages, which arose through close contact between unrelated languages, should be considered English or not. Calling them mixed languages shouldn't obscure the fact that Creoles are fully developed languages with their own grammar and vocabulary. Art of speech. Do you have any questions before we go on? Would you like to have a break? Yes. Would you like to have a break? 5-minute break is fine. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll continue. Okay, so 5 minutes and we're back. Thank you.